Town forced to bulldoze new development after building on land they didn't own. Hi Reddit, I've got one gem of a story that my grandfather told me about his hometown after he came home from World War II. It has to do with a tree farmer, a corrupt mayor, and over 20 homes getting bulldozed. Enjoy. At the end of World War II, thousands of troops were heading home, starting new families, and wanting to move out of the city. There was a major housing boom all around the country. People couldn't move out of the cities fast enough, and developers could not build homes fast enough either. There was tons of money to be made in the construction business, which led to some, quote, underhanded business practices. One such practice started construction before the land acquisition was actually finalized. Enter my grandfather. Let's call him G. After serving as a pilot during the war, he came home to a very different town. When G went off to fight in 1942, the town was what he would describe as, quote, tired and worn down. But to his amazement, the town he saw stepping off the train in 1948 was anything but. Newly paved roads, a traffic light, and new homes. New homes that just went on and on. He actually got lost on his way back to the family farm due to the new main town road being rerouted while he was away. But what took him by surprise the most was a new development being built on his childhood friend, let's call him John's, tree farm. This was very surprising to him, mainly because he knew how much the farm meant to John and his family. The farm went back at least 2 generations, but my G just guessed that the developer had made John's family an offer that was too good to refuse. However, the thought was shot down later that evening during his welcome home dinner back home. It was my great-grandmother that tipped him off that something was off. He couldn't recall exactly what she had said, but it was something along the lines of, "Oh, I just wish John was still alive to be here." My G nearly choked, not because of the news, but because John was not dead. He was still in Hawaii. My G had gotten a postcard from him not but 4 days ago. Turns out while John was off in the Navy fighting in the Pacific Theater for our country, John's dad had suffered a stroke and passed away, and his mother passed away less than a week from, quote, a broken heart. More than likely, John was never informed of their passing, and now the 20 plus homes that were being built on their land. My G about ran out of the house, jumped in his father's Model T, and raced into town to send one bombshell of a telegram to John in Hawaii. John, your folks passed. Farm now being built on. Come quick. G. My G never got a response back. He figured that John must have fainted from shock, then jumped up and ran to the Navy base to get the first boat home, because he was back in less than 4 days, and he was mad. According to my G, when he burst through the doors of the mayor's office, everyone in the room looked like they were about to drop dead. The poor desk clerk was fumbling over his words, trying to talk to John. When the mayor came out of his office to see what all the commotion was about, as soon as he saw John, he went white as a sheet and then ran back into his office and locked the door. Getting nowhere at the mayor's office, John went to the next town over and hired a lawyer. What followed was a 7-year court case that ended in the mayor being sentenced to 8 years in jail and the developer going bankrupt. Turns out after John's parents passed away, John wasn't able to be contacted for some reason, and then they just assumed he was dead. So when an out-of-state developer wanted to build homes in the area, the mayor just permitted them to start building on John's farm for a quite hefty kickback, of course. Also, because John's lawsuit, the developer couldn't finish the pre-sold homes, which ended up in more lawsuits. In the end, the mayor, the developer, and the town ended up having to pay John close to $45,000 in total. Today, that'd be worth over $752,000, and then they had to return the farm to its prior condition. To say John was happy would be a vast understatement. Today, John's tree farm is a nature reserve, and the story of the corrupt mayor is all but forgotten except by a few locals. John passed away in 1999. My G has been back to his hometown a few times to visit his grave and to check on the old tree farm. This man fought for our country in World War II, and you're just gonna pretend like he's dead and just build a bunch of homes on his land? Oh my goodness, that's the most disrespectful thing I've ever heard. I'm so glad he came back, even though it took how many years? 7 years to get his land back and get his money, but at least he got his money, at least he got his land back. And also that mayor, I really hope that mayor rots in prison. I can't believe you do that to somebody who's serving our country and whose parents had just died. Like, Jesus, that is so bad.
Neighbors kept parking in our parking lot, so I froze them out. This happened around 20 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, 3 units each. We lived in 2 of them and rented out the other 4. There's nothing but these 3 flats lining both sides of the road for about a mile. Not all of them have parking. On the side streets are houses and they have very little street parking. We had more land than most of these units since it was also our home, so we had parking for about 16 cars. Everything was going fine for literally decades. Then, cars started appearing in our parking lot that were not our tenants. I blocked one in one day and went outside to see that this a-hole drove through our bushes and across the yard to get out. I called the cops, but there's nothing that they could do, so I called a tow company and had them put up signs. We'd have to call them to get a car towed, but the signs seemed to work. No more random cars. Until New Year's Eve one year. I arrive home and every space is filled. There are even cars on the street blocking in other cars. I'm beyond pissed. I called the tow company and they can't do anything for a few hours because they're so busy. We're in the Chicago suburbs and it's below 0 out, so I have an idea. I dug out all of the lawn sprinklers and hoses. I run one of the hoses inside to the laundry room faucet and turn on the hot water. This way, the hose and the sprinklers won't ice up. But the cars on the ground sure did. 3 sprinklers moved every half hour or so for almost 5 hours. Every car, every square inch of the parking lot, and the streets by the cars encased completely in ice. I made it a point to spray ice in the locks, in between the window seals and glass, and even in the grills. I put away the sprinklers and the hoses and then went to bed. Around 4 a.m., furious pounding on all of the doors. The doorbells were ringing non-stop. We just smiled and called the cops. We waited until they arrived and went outside. The cops were holding back laughter. These people were told to park by their friend who owned an apartment several buildings away. This friend is the same idiot who drove over our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and told the people to move their cars or get towed. In our town, cops can ticket on private property with the owner's permission, so all the cars were ticketed. They were also towed since nobody could get in their vehicle. I sure wish we had it on video. OP, I wish you had a video of it too. I can't imagine the look on their faces when they saw that all of their cars were encased in a winter wonderland. And they got tickets on top of it. This was the perfect way to get your revenge back. And it's a warning to anyone who decides to park on private property. Let this be a lesson to you. Try to steal my illegally rented parking spot. Enjoy being unemployed. This happened last night, and I'm now in a good enough spot to actually post this. I'm not quite sure if it qualifies as pro, but it definitely isn't petty. I'm a professional driver. As such, on the road in the United States, there's different truck stops throughout the country that have a pay-to-park system. This usually entails about 10 to 20% of the parking lot marked off as reserved, with each space running around $15 to $25. The truck stop where this took place had a parking of $17, which is relatively cheap for a guaranteed spot. The spots are reserved for 24 hours, starting at 4 p.m. local time and extending to 3 p.m. the following afternoon. I knew that I would have a late night delivery, so I came to the truck stop around 3:30 and paid for a reserved spot. I told the manager on duty that I had a delivery up the road that night and we'd be back once the delivery was completed. But I should still be able to clear out the spot by the next afternoon, which is today. She told me that this was okay and that she would mark the spot as sold whenever I left. That way, if someone else comes in trying to reserve that spot, she would consult her notes and deny the sale. 11:15 p.m. rolls around and I take off for my delivery. I don't get out of that facility until 2:30 a.m. the next morning, this morning. So I groggily drive back to the truck stop to reclaim my paid-for spot, only to find that the reserved parking spaces are all full. I call the manager on duty and after giving her my info, inform her that all of the spots are full and that someone has parked in my spot and hasn't paid for it. She sends her other employee to start checking out the trucks. The culprit was from a company that's known for their bright orange trailers and he was the company driver for it. The other employee starts banging on his door to inform him that he's parked illegally, and he has to move. Meanwhile, I can see the commotion from my mirror, with my vantage point from the fuel island, where I had been instructed to temporarily park. The driver answers the door with a bottle of beer in one hand and some sort of smoking implement in the other. I know what it is, but for the sake of the mods, and YouTube, I'm not going to say it. I decided to roll down the window to hear the commotion, and I could hear the employee tell the driver to either move or he'll get the towing company and the police involved. The driver is flat out irate that someone had the audacity to tell him where he can and cannot park. So he slams the door on the employee, threatening him. The employee calls the police and tow company and the police show up first. Now, I had worked for this orange trailer company before, so I know what their policies are, and more importantly, what they can and cannot have in their trucks. Alcoholic beverages are not allowed in the cab. Anything that isn't a cigarette or cigar and a lighter, also not allowed. The coup de grace, a pew-pew. Of any kind, absolutely not allowed, and especially not allowed loaded. This guy had all of that and some other not-so-legal substances in his cab, so he was hauled off away in handcuffs. His truck was hauled off away on a wrecker after that. I made a call after the commotion died down to the company safety director and informed them that their rig would be in an impound lot and that their driver is going to go to jail for some not-so-legal stuff that he had in his truck. She thanked me and said that he will definitely lose his job, especially over the alcohol and the other not-so-legal stuff. I guess he played the screw around and find out card and it bit him in his career. I bet this truck driver was so excited to find someone's unused parking spot without realizing that it would bite them in the butt later. Anyways, OP, I'm glad that you were able to get your parking spot and you were able to bring down this reckless driver.
Don't mess with an engineer. I work for a company that provides specialized equipment used in manufacturing. To protect my anonymity, I'll have to be vague about what exactly this machine does. During my time working in this field, I got to know many clients who needed these machines installed and serviced. One of these customers Let's call him Jake. I later left the company for a different job, but Jake apparently kept my number. One afternoon, I got a call from Jake that they wanted a new unit installed and another unit that needed maintenance and wanted to know if I was available. I let him know that I left the company, but I would pass him on to somebody who could help. He tells me that he'll pay double my current rate just to install it over the weekend. He lets me know that the company has increased the rates for installation and the company just can't afford it. The instructions they send over just aren't clear enough and their engineers are scratching their head trying to figure it out. He begs me to consider it, and I agree. For more context, installing this unit can take a good few hours, or up to a day on your own. The company gives you two options. You can either pay for the engineer to come and install it, or you can save money and they'll send the instructions so the customer's own engineer can install it by themselves. The instructions aren't super easy to follow, and it's company policy that if somebody has started the installation on the equipment, that the supplier wouldn't get involved if they couldn't verify any of the pieces weren't broken. This will be important later. I drive down on the weekend and they show me where the boxes of equipment are. I set to work and make good progress on installing the unit. Around 6 hours in, and I'm stopped by Jake who greets me. I let him know I'm nearly finished, and he tells me, quote, "Sorry, but they just don't have the budget to pay you." He understands my frustration, but his engineers can take it from here. To say I was frustrated was an understatement, and I wanted revenge. There's a small button inside the unit that changes the unit into test mode. This is done to perform maintenance on the unit, but it's impossible to configure the unit with this button pressed. It's only possible to reach this button using a pin, so it's not easily pressed during the installation process. Because of this, the installation instructions don't mention it. There's no real way of telling the equipment is in test mode, it just won't work normally. I think you can guess where this is going. I clicked the button, I collected my things, and I left. Monday morning, I get a call from Jake. I declined. I knew my old company wouldn't get involved since I already started installing the unit, and I knew his engineers would never figure it out. So I just let him stew. A few days later, with many missed calls, I finally pick up. Jake is furious. He asks me where the heck I've been and why haven't I been picking up the phone. He tells me he can't figure out how to configure the machine and they need my help. I tell him, "Why is this my problem? You won't pay me." He told me he was sorry and that they would work something out as soon as possible. I told him, "No, you're gonna pay me $7,000 up front before I do anything. I've never felt this powerful before." He screamed at me for a bit, and then he hung up. He called back a day later saying he was sorry for how he acted, and he said that if I would come and fix it, he'd actually pay me, in a totally defeated tone. He tried to fight it, saying that he'll pay me when I was done, but I was having none of it. A bit of back and forth, and he agrees to pay me. The money hit my account, and I came in the next day. The look of confusion over his face when I took a pin out and changed the unit from test mode was priceless. It was even more priceless with seeing his reaction of me packing up my tools and leaving only after 20 minutes of configuring. Easiest $7,000 I've ever made. Don't try and mess with a professional problem solver.
Want to abuse me on the street? Don't fall asleep in public then. This happened in my early 20s and I just thought of it today. I promise it's not as bad as the foreboding title suggests. I'd gone out with a few friends for a few drinks. We had a favorite kebab shop that we'd like to frequent after these kinds of nights. We were friendly with the staff and the food was great. We went outside for a smoke while our food was being made, and while we were chatting, this big shaven-headed dude just appeared in the middle of us and tried to grab my arm. I jumped back, stumbled into my friends really, and flailed him away, and he started roaring some half-unintelligible stuff about how I'm no good as anything but a slave? What the F? And that he wanted to follow me home and beat me before S-ing and killing me. What the actual? Before spitting on me. It was so sudden and just very shocking and scary. We all went inside when a member of staff who overheard the commotion and saw me upset came out and got him to leave eventually, after a fair bit of abuse. No one was hurt, but I was pretty shooken up and more than a bit paranoid of seeing him around town for the next few weeks. The pure rage in him towards me and everyone was just genuinely frightening. Fast forward a few months and I've just finished work at a late bar. There's a 24-hour cafe around the corner and I used to go for tea and toasted sandwiches to take home because I usually didn't want to cook around like 3 a.m. In the middle of this cafe, there was a bunch of couches and tables where people used to go play Dungeons and Dragons during the day, and those couches were comfy. Lo and behold, the man from before was there, stinking of booze and cigarettes, and passed out. This was not unusual to see here because after a certain time of night when there's so few around, the single staff member just didn't care if anyone napped on the couches, and generally didn't like confrontation anyway. I recognized him immediately, and an evil plan formed. Now, I'm no artiste, but I'm pretty crafty, and I always have something in my backpack. What I had that day was a dropper of the most obnoxious, iridescent, unicorn-esque liquid glitter, and a few small tubs of the finest cosmetic glitter around in various colors. I waited for my moment and made my approach. I surreptitiously dropped a tiny drip from my dropper after warming it in my hands as I passed to see how deep asleep he was. He was out cold, so I went to town. I did a spiral of liquid all over his stubby dome. I almost died with fright as he sleepily rubbed his head at one point, but to my glee, he just spread it all over his face. While the liquid was still tacky, I gently dumped a fine glitter all over it, knowing that stuff would set in. He was beautiful. Glorious even. Like a clown mated with a Christmas tree and birthed a sparkly butthole baby. The barista, who I was quite friendly with, just watched, smirking. He did ask me what I was doing afterwards, but when I explained myself, he just laughed and said, "Oh yeah, that guy's always such a jerk." I see nothing. Play stupid games, win sparkly prizes. I'm not real sure why the story was in petty revenge because I feel like it's pro-revenge. This guy sounds insanely creepy, but I'm glad that you were able to get some karmic justice, OP. I like to imagine that this guy woke up and was just super confused as to why he was covered in glitter. Everyone knows that glitter sticks to everything, so I can just imagine that this guy is constantly haunted by tiny specks of glitter and constantly wondering why he was covered in glitter that one time. Don't mess with my Fanta. This is one of those delightful workplace food fridge thief stories. I have poor impulse control, so if I have things that I like, I tend to take advantage of that. For example, if I have cans that I like to drink, I will often drink them all. Fast forward to the point that I started a new workplace. I buy a multi-pack and deliberately leave it in the work fridge because I know that when I'm not at work, I can't drink it. But I start to notice that my drinks seem a little short. Not only that, so do my yogurts. Same rationale. Not an issue, right? Probably just that I miscounted and ate or drank one or two more than I thought, so I counted them carefully, and sure enough, there's a couple missing each day, so I left it for 24 hours. The day after that, I taped a note. "Dear Thief, since I noticed my food and drink going missing, I have taken to licking the outside of every container. So whilst you've been enjoying my Fanta, you've also been drinking a considerable amount of my saliva. The food in there is not free. Please buy your own in the future." The day after that, all of my missing cans were mysteriously replaced. Whilst I never found out who it was, none of my stuff went missing after that. It's been over a year, and the other day, a colleague who happened to stumble upon the incident commented, "Don't mess with his Fanta." Putting a note on your lunch like this works most of the time until you run into that one guy who just doesn't care and just eats it anyway. Table for one? This is not my story, but my wife's, and I'll keep it short and sweet. She was a waitress at a local breakfast diner, and she has to deal with her fair share of jerks. One in particular has always made a problem. Sometimes it's that the food should have been made a certain way. He doesn't order it a certain way, he just expects the waitress to remember how he takes it. And sometimes it's that the dishwasher is stacking plates too loudly. Not kidding, unfortunately. She is the epitome of professional, so she never flips out on the guy. She just can't stand him. He is very prideful. He expects people to recognize him, know his order when he walks in, and treat him like the royalty he is, which is exactly the angle that she uses against him. Whenever he comes in now, she asks him, "Just one today?" He always gets upset when she asks, because he feels like he deserves to be recognized. She says it makes her day, because every day she works, she gets to remind him that he is alone, while still being a professional. I can't believe this guy expects you to remember his order like there isn't hundreds of customers that come in every day. If this guy's gonna come in and expect to be treated like royalty, then treat him like a stranger. "Oh, welcome in, sir. Have you ever been here before? My name's Waitress. Let me get your order for you. Have you heard of the specials?" Is it petty? Yeah, but it's also hilarious. And hopefully it knocked this guy down a couple pegs. Bully acts the same way he was in school? Yes, I'll tell on you then. In secondary school, I was tormented by a specific bully. For years, I was beaten up and publicly humiliated on a daily basis. The worst thing he did was beat me up so bad that I got a concussion and broken ribs when I was 14. He never faced consequences in school because his family was rich and he was pretty popular. For context, I live in a pretty small town in England, so everyone knows everyone, including the bully. He left the school when I was 17 and I didn't see him for about a year. Around this time, I got way more popular and started going to parties and making more friends. And annoyingly, he was friends with some of my friends, and his girlfriend was at my school, but I managed to avoid him mostly until I finished school. Unfortunately, I saw him a few months later when me and my friends went to a pub to celebrate our exam results. He was a total jerk to me. He started insulting me and mocking me to my friends, saying, "Why do you guys even hang out with OP?" Bringing up a bunch of stuff from years ago. And at one point, he put me in a headlock and told me that my friends only hung out with me out of pity. I wasn't gonna take it, but I also wasn't gonna get into a fight because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of getting me angry. And right at that moment, I overheard the perfect thing. He was bragging to his friends about the house party that he was having and talking about all of the drugs that he was gonna take to the party. And he said that he had it all in his car. It wasn't just a bit of weed either. If I remember correctly, he said he had 13 bags of coke, about 30 pills of MDMA, and 7 or 8 grams of ketamine. That's when I knew what I would do for my revenge on this guy. As he was leaving, I followed him to his car and took a photo of his number plate. Then after he was driving off, I walked off and called the police. I knew they needed something more than hearsay to stop the car, especially because I didn't want to be tracked back to it, so I told the police that I saw my bully snorting a suspicious white powder in the pub toilets. This was a complete fabrication, and then get into the driver's side of the car. I then provided them with the license plate of the car and told them the direction they were heading in. I honestly didn't think that they were going to stop him. Maybe they would ask him questions later and ruin his party, but the driving on drugs allegations, plus the fact that he had been arrested for a minor possession before, which I didn't know at the time, was enough for the police to take it seriously. They stopped him and searched his car, which they found all the drugs that he was transporting to the party, and he got arrested for it. The consequences of his arrest meant that he lost out on his university place. His rich parents had enough of his behavior, so they kicked him out and cut him off from their funds. And a rumor I heard was that in turn for a lower sentence, my bully ratted out his supplier, which resulted in him getting stabbed multiple times, and as a consequence of that, he now has to wear a colonostomy bag. And that, plus his criminal record, means he's currently unemployed. OP, it sounds like your bully was a real jerk, and while I don't think he deserved to get stabbed, it sounds like this dirtbag now has to actually poop in a dirtbag.
Dude pays me in counterfeit currency, immediately gets arrested. Years ago in 2010 when I was doing pizza delivery, I delivered on campus, pretty standard procedure, called the customer and was waiting in the parking lot. Buddy comes down, hands me the money, takes the pizza and walks away. Then he starts to run? I look in my hand and one of the $10 bills is ripped in half and the other 20 is horribly counterfeit. Dude's already back in his dorm and it's pass activated so I can't get in. Then I remembered I have his number in my phone from when I called him. So I call the store and tell them what happened and they mark his number as a prank caller, so no more deliveries. Figured. That's good enough, I guess. Then when I was leaving, I see campus security talking to a police member. There was a check stop just before the entrance to the grounds. I stop, walk up, and give him a rundown of what happened. I give the counterfeit bill and the ripped bill to the officer, while the campus security dude is looking up the phone number in the student directory. Campus security finds out who it is, and off they go. 10 minutes later, Buddy's in the back of a police car with his dorm mate for theft under $1,000 because they technically didn't pay for the pizza, possession of counterfeit currency because he had way more in his dorm, possession of narcotics, possession of a controlled substance, Addies and Xannies I do believe, possession with the intent to sell, possession of stolen property, and there was another charge but I can't remember. I guess he posted bail a couple days later and came down to the pizza shop to quote, have some words with me, but I wasn't working that night, so Buddy started trashing the lobby and got arrested again. This time he was charged with trespassing, criminal mischief, and vandalism. And they found a knife on him as well when they searched him, so there was a weapon charge there too, but I think that might have got dropped. I'm not sure what happened after the second arrest, but I was never called to testify in court, but I assume he took a plea deal. He most definitely got expelled from the university though. OP, I like how you went to nuclear revenge without even really trying. You kind of were just like, hey, he was kind of doing a bad over there if you might want to go look at it, and then boom, they dropped the hammer on him.
Revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine has been cooling for 10 years and counting. I have been married to my husband for 20 years now. We have a 16-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. My husband is what I would consider a high earner by middle-class standards. Also, strap in folks, this is gonna be a long one. I've never told anyone this, so here we go. 10 years ago, and by complete coincidence, I found out that my husband had been cheating on me, with men, and that it started before we got married. We live in a smallish town in the south in the US. Him coming out as gay will have consequences. I believe that this is the only reason that he hasn't come out to anyone. First, here's how I found out that he was cheating on me. He got sloppy. He left a credit card bill, for a secret card, in the pocket of his coat. While I was going through it, I found all the telltale signs of infidelity. Payments to a hotel in a nearby county, restaurant bills, gifts, flowers, bedtime balloons, and other things. I started camping outside of the hotel on days that he told me that he would be late, and I saw him bringing different men in there. Now, I am very good at compartmentalization, and I have a great poker face. It comes with growing up in an abusive household, so I was able to give myself time to cool off and come up with what I should do next. The first thing I did was get an STD panel, since I didn't know how safe he was being with his partners. It came out negative. Then I convinced him that we should use bedtime balloons, since I was having side effects from the pill. He was okay with it. I had a long think, and I came up with the decision that I was not going to confront him, nor was I going to leave him. He was able to provide me with a really good lifestyle, one that I would never be able to afford with my high school diploma. A cleaning lady, a nanny to help with the kids, regular spa days in a country club, a new car every other year, luxury family vacations every year, and he was a good dad, a good partner, the cheating aside, and really good in bed. But I was not going to let him have a single guilt-free week in his life. That would be my revenge. I started small, planning great date nights for us, telling him that I felt our relationship has cooled, that I wanted the spark back, Then I would sometimes slip into conversation some tea about a cheating husband and a gay man that's been using his poor wife as a beard. I would also compliment the only gay couple we know for having the courage of being real men who were out and proud of themselves. On the other hand, I would praise him as being the perfect husband to anyone and everyone, especially if he was in earshot. The amount of guilt gifts I got was astounding. The man was even sending me flowers weekly. This continued the same way for years. I could literally see how much it was weighing on him. Me? Well, my parents were part of a commune with the concept of free love. I was the same. I just considered myself in an open marriage. It seems that cheating is easier to ignore if you're not that big on monogamy in the first place. And my husband was keeping me satisfied, so I felt no need to find a partner of my own. Then, 4 years ago, I guess he met the love of his life. He started seeing just one guy. I was seriously thinking of ending the whole thing, especially since I started a business by then, and I was able to bring in enough money to support myself and my kids while maintaining my lifestyle. But then, he went and introduced his side piece to us. He brought him into our house, introduced him to our kids, and that was enough for me to keep tormenting him. Apparently, he was a new friend he made while golfing. He started hinting at moving to another state, one where it would be easier for him to come out. I refused. I told him that my business was here, and that I was not going to start over in another state. Also, the kids had their friends and extended family here. It would be unfair to uproot them. Then, he started trying to start arguments. I guess he wanted us to fight, then for me to ask for a divorce. I just stopped all of those arguments in their tracks. I would just agree with whatever he said. He was right and I was wrong. How about a nice dinner and some great hanky-panky? He hated that. I knew from spying on his phone that doing the do with me felt like cheating on his boyfriend. The audacity of this man. I also knew that his boyfriend was pressuring him to leave me almost every day. He was stuck between a rock and a hard place. He started drinking, and when it got too heavy, that was when I decided enough was enough. I wanted to ruin his life, not his health. Also, I grew up with an alcoholic father and I did not want that for my kids. So I gathered all of the evidence of his infidelity over the last 9 years. Photos with different men, conversations, his Grindr profile, even though he no longer has one, everything. Then, I hired a divorce attorney and mailed the evidence to his employer. He has a morality clause in his contract and adultery breaks it. All of his relatives, including his parents, as well as our church, his actually, I was never big on religion like him. It was like a bomb exploded. He was fired, the congregation turned on him for cheating, not for being gay. Let's keep that straight. I would never allow my kids to be a part of a church that discriminated against their father, even if he was not out. His parents wouldn't take him in after I kicked him out, and he was shamed publicly. Gotta love that small town gossip mill. And the cherry on top, his boyfriend was run out of town, and he couldn't follow him because he wanted to fight for custody of our kids. Now, almost a year later, I am a free woman. I got to keep the house, my car, and my business. He got 75% of the retirement and investments accounts, and he won't be paying any alimony. I got full custody, and he got visitations. I also got child support. He had to move 6 hours away to find a new job. He couldn't put the last job he worked at his whole life as a reference. His relationship with his family was rocky, his reputation in town was ruined, so he can't move back anytime soon. The love of his life left him for good, and my kids only tolerate him because I did my best to shield them, and to tell them that he is still a good father to them. I also made sure to treat him politely, never talked bad about him, and I had a lengthy talk with my kids about how their father being gay is okay, and it's who he is and it's not his fault. That the only wrong thing he did was hiding it from me. So I guess the results of his cheating was years of guilt followed by a ruined life. Edit. Let's make something clear. I am not a good person in this story. We were both bad. I am not here trying to get pats on the back or to be told that I did well. I know what I did was messed up and I am here because I wanted to tell someone, and I can't do that IRL. Wow, OP. This story is the absolute definition of nuclear revenge. I definitely think he deserved what got coming to him, but I still don't think you're right in doing so. The ends don't justify the means here. But anyways, I'm glad that you got out of that toxic relationship and you're living your best life. Hey, you're tattoo artist. This happened when I was young. Heard it secondhand from my grandmother, who the main character of the cast lived with at the time. My uncle's ex-girlfriend was an all-around horrible person. Abusive babysitter, got my uncle into bad crowds and legal trouble, and dabbled in so many substances from A to Z. She was also heavily tatted. There was an artist, the star of the story, who was a family friend. Great dude, insane work. She asked him to do a piece for her. Huge, intricate angel wings. Oh, the irony. Across her back. He agrees. It takes several sessions across weeks. She repeatedly has to postpone payment, but he's chill. Family friend, yada yada. Until it comes to the last session, when it slips that she still doesn't have the money. And more importantly, won't have the money. Like, ever. Now, the prorevenge. No collection agency, no refusal to continue. He smiles, waves it off, says he'll finish up, no charge. It's gonna be a great piece. Legendary. One for the history books, he guarantees. She's stoked. So right between those gorgeous wings, right up her spine, this idiot now has a massive, veiny male appendage proudly standing at attention up her spine. She saw it in the mirror when he was finished and she was livid. But hey, what's she gonna do? She didn't pay him and wasn't going to pay him and expected hours and hours of work. You give a lot of trust to someone when they have a needle to your skin to lay down something permanent. Don't stiff your artist. This is the perfect way to get revenge on people who don't pay their tattoo artists. Why would you be cheap and skimp out on something so permanent? Never piss off your tattoo artist.
You want to lie and use people? I got you. This one needs background to fully understand why I went out of my way for this revenge. My best friend was married for 10 years, with his ex for a total of 13. He was absolutely head over heels in love with her, like I had never seen before, which I never understood due to her alcohol abuse. She would take it out on him, and when he'd be venting about it, he'd always fall back on, quote, "It's not her, it's the illness." A very respectable and admirable stance on it. Last year, she asked for a divorce because after years of what I would call abuse, he had simply just run out of gas. Her reasoning for asking for one? When she'd get fired for testing positive for weed, he wasn't empathetic enough. He does admit that he wasn't because it had come on the back of one of her drunken tirades where she told him he was a piece of crap who was always trying to control her, when all he ever tried to do was get her away from the booze, for the way she treated him when she was drunk. It took him forever to move on, with the divorce following short after. And earlier this year, after thinking he was moving on, he calls me to come over and he's in a bad way. I arrive and he's absolutely fall down levels of drunk. Going on, she didn't ask for the divorce for the reasons he said, but she's actually been cheating with several other people. The next morning, when he's more coherent, I ask him how he knew. He was cleaning out the spare bedroom and selling or donating stuff that he didn't need anymore, and when he went to clear an old tablet, she was still logged in and all the evidence was there. He gets that out and says he's going back to bed and asks me to lock up before I leave. Before I left, I took a look at the tablet, and after seeing what I saw, I wanted to find a way to get even with that horrible and conniving woman, so I took pictures of it all and left. When I got home, I started looking up information on these people. 2 of them were just normal guys. Whether they knew she was married or not, I really don't know. But the third, well, let's just say the third comes up on a certain list. Still on probation for being such a disgusting pile of garbage, and his address is listed as 123 Lane, City, State. Chomo knew she was married. I immediately knew what I was gonna do. Chomo didn't live on 123 Lane. Chomo was living with conniving ex. She made regular posts about their time together. On top of that, she was an avid weed user and had several firearms that she enjoyed sport shooting. So I go into the state's site, I make a report of Chomo not actually living where he's registered, and that Chomo is living in a home where he has no right to be a convicted felon and on parole. I include screenshots of social media posts and all to back it up. I was thinking little would happen, but inconvenience their lives. Boy, was I wrong. She broke her typical post with nothing serious trend on social media yesterday with this gem.
My year can't get any worse. Chomo lost his job and now I'm facing eviction because I can't afford my rent.
So I go on the state court system site to see if it's related, and yes, it was. Chomo was rearrested. She clearly can't post bail or Chomo would be out. The job she took after being fired definitely can't support her lifestyle. So he's probably gonna go back to prison or at least jail, and she's a breath away from being homeless. I don't know if I'll ever tell my friend I was the one behind this, but he's definitely ecstatic to see a horrible woman and a sewer rat get what they deserve. Part of me wants to put up the sex offender registration link and that it's sitting in jail and say something to the effect of, it's a little more than losing a job, but not wanting to make my best friend's life harder, I'll just let sleeping dogs lie. OP, I really enjoyed this prorevenge story. The cheating wife definitely deserved it. That kind man does not deserve to be run over by you and your substance abuse. And the Chomo, I don't even think I have to explain why the Chomo deserved what he got, but I'm glad he got what's coming to him. Both these guys deserve what was coming.
Revenge on a movie producer. Please note well in advance that this story is not mine. In fact, it's a rather popular story in a town that I once lived in, Savannah, Georgia, and centers around one homeowner who got royally annoyed with the movie producer. Okay, so first and foremost, when movie producers are looking for places to set movies that take place in colonial or even 1800 cities in the US, due to the sheer number of parks, wide roads, and period houses, they will often select Savannah, Georgia. They'll pull all the Spanish moss out of the trees, or trim it back, pour dirt on the roads around the squares, and effectively backdate that part of the city to fit most any place, even up to some having used the area as a setting for places as early as Washington, D.C., and even places in Britain or France. Typically, when producers do this, they will pay each homeowner whose house is used in the background a couple $1,000s for the licensing to do so. This will be important later. Trust me. They issue some rules, like no electronic lights being visible, not coming out of any doors that face the street, and you have to move your car away from the driveway, if you have a driveway. Well, it was 1979. A A producer came from Hollywood for the intention of using Savannah for that very purpose. Specifically, the producer was from one of the big 3-letter TV channels and was working on making a made-for-TV movie, talking about the events after the assassination of Lincoln and the subsequent actions of the doctor present at his death. The production went to the city to seek permission, and then sent an announcement out to each of the homeowners telling them of the various days that the shoot was going to take place. However, much to their downfall, they also noted that the production company would not be compensating the homeowners for the use of their homes as backdrops. This was met with some great annoyance by the homeowners, who turned to the city for help, only to be told that it was their civic duty to allow them to use their homes. Most everyone agreed to this and bit their lips. One homeowner, however, didn't. He decided to get revenge on the production, attempting to screw up their shooting every chance he got. He first started by leaving his car out in front of his house, only to have it towed before filming started. He threatened legal action against the studio, but that fell on deaf ears. He forbade the use of his home in some of the shots, but the production company got the city to make him back down. Eventually, enough was enough. So he waited, biding his time until he was certain that they were filming. When the day came that his house was being used as a background shot, the homeowner grabbed a massive, I don't think I can say this on YouTube, so offensive red flag, and hung it out in front of his house on top of one of the windows. The production company balked. They knew that this ruined any shot that they'd used there. And what's more, they started to question just when he'd put the flag up. Was it just one day, or had all the previous shots, some of which showed the house from across the square, been ruined as well? They turned to the city for help, and the city just basically shrugged and said that it was his First Amendment right to do that, and implied that had the production company paid the homeowners, as had always been done before, then this probably wouldn't have happened. In the end, the production company had to end shooting, and go to the homeowner begging for him to remove the offending flag. He did eventually do so, but only after his lawyer got a contract in writing that required the production company to pay all the homeowners for having their homes in the shot. The flag came down, and shooting was wrapped up in less than a day. Interestingly, it's said that the movie in question, The Ordeal of Dr. Mudd, there are several shots where you can see a bright red flag flying from one of the homes in the distance. That stunt cost a producer quite a substantial amount of money, and pushed production back at least a year, while they tried to find every single instance of that flag flying in the background of the shots. This homeowner would go on to himself become very famous, though not for a good reason. Even so, he lives on among the legends of that city, both for his revenge against the movie producer and his later brush with fame. The fellow in question is none other than Jim Williams. Williams was an American antique dealer and a historic preservationist based in Savannah, Georgia. He played an active role in the preservation of the Savannah Historic District for over 35 years. Williams was arrested on May 2, 1981, for the alleged murder of 21-year-old Danny Hansford, with whom he had been having a homosexual relationship with at Mercer House. After the subsequent 4 trials, a record in the state of Georgia, Williams was finally acquitted by a jury in Augusta in May 1989, 8 years after his arrest. Williams died in 1990 of heart failure, though AIDS is also suspected. He is the center of the novel and Clint Eastwood movie, Midnight of the Garden of Good and Evil. I found the story to be really interesting, and now I'm going to have to watch the movie to see if I see any red flags off in the distance. Though I was really confused on how this guy has this giant red offensive flag just lying around, but OP actually answers this question down in the comments. He was an antiques dealer. He specialized in various kinds of artifacts. If memory serves, the flag he had possessed had been captured by a US soldier near the end of the war. He tended to sell more high-end types of antiques. For some context, his antique stealing earned him enough money to buy Mercer House. The house sold in 1999 for $8.45 million. He bought it for around $1 million sometime in the 60s. So that kind of answers why he had that lying around. But it kind of sounds like this Jim Williams wasn't really that nice of a person. But neither was the production company. Anyways, this was a really interesting pro-revenge/history lesson. Thanks, OP.
My hag of a stepmom gave away my PS4 while I was away at college. So I rented out, quote, her house while she was away on her honeymoon with her newest husband. I've been reading lots of Reddit lately, especially entitled parents, but I made a new account when I came across this page. I never thought I'd actually try to contribute something. Until now, Reddit's just been a guilty morning coffee read. So, here it goes. I'm an only son. My mom died of ovarian cancer at only 55 5 years ago. It broke my dad's heart. They'd been together since college and were the same age, with my dad only being a month older. I'm 22 and I'm about to graduate college with my degree in chemistry when the main event starts to occur. I went to college on a full-ride scholarship. This is important later. My dad met my now stepmom when she was the nurse at my mom's hospital where she spent her final days. My stepmom, let's call her Grace, played all the right notes to get my dad's trust. She was empathetic to him, nurturing, and comforting after my mom's passing. I was 17 and old enough to sense that she was trying to weasel her way into getting my dad's resources. But it was up to my dad if he wanted to be in a relationship with her. I, on the other hand, was in my final year of public school and had just won a scholarship to attend college out of the country the following year. My dad mourned my mom for a year, and that whole time Grace would check in on him by phone every month or so. in my opinion, to scope out the possibility of sinking her hooks into him. After a year had passed, Grace took off the gloves and went after my dad hard. Grace was only 40 when she and my dad started seeing each other. I didn't like her, but at the same time, at least my dad didn't seem so depressed anymore. I tried to be less pessimistic about her and give her the benefit of the doubt. In my gut, I didn't trust her though. But we were Scandinavian, and at least in my family, the son does not tell the father what to do or offer any opinion. Grace is from the Czech Republic, if you're wondering. My father was a very successful banker during his career and had amassed quite a portfolio of wealth. I'll spare you the details, but after 6 months of dating, Grace and my father are married. My dad never really got over mom though, and he was getting weaker and weaker even though he was only 57. Since his health was fading, he called me to him and asked me point blank, "Boy, what do you need to set you up in life?" I told him, "I don't need anything. I'm a man and I can take care of myself." "But what are you even talking about, Dad? You're gonna be around for decades." Yet, I did remind him that he had living sisters with children, and I also reminded him that I had a full scholarship to college, so don't worry about giving me any cash. A year later, he died at 59. I of course have seen lots of Hollywood movies, so I consider the conspiracy theory that maybe my dad's nurse wife poisoned him and made him sign over all his money to her, but I really honestly don't think that's what happened. Other relatives didn't like Grace either, but they knew my dad was totally in love with my mom and that her death utterly broke him. Well, long story short, my dad bequeathed his 5-bedroom house to me even though I wasn't expecting it and I didn't ask for it. He gave a small endowment to each one of his sisters and their children. He left about 80% of all of his existing money to Grace, which amounted to several hundreds of thousands of dollars. My dad ignored me because of course he's generous to a fault, and he still gave me tens of thousands of dollars, which were of course very helpful to me. Grace tried to put on a friendly front, but I could tell that she was super angry that she didn't get my dad's house too. That belonged to me, and I had the legal papers to prove it. She was especially mad because we live in an extremely upscale and trendy location, and houses are hard to come by and easily sold for massive profit. During the first few months after my dad's death, I had the nauseating, creeping experience of knowing that Grace was trying to feel me out to see if I might be into a little relationship with her. Ugh, gross. She still stayed at the house though, because over the last 3 years she had gotten used to living there and she acted like she owned it. And even though I officially owned it, I was always away at college and only visited my dad's old house once every couple of months. And even then, it wasn't to see Grace, but to see my cousins who lived just a few miles away. I downplayed the fact that it was really my house, and over the months I think Grace gradually forgot that she had no legal right to the house. She probably believed that sooner or later because I never asked her for any of the hundreds of thousands of my dad's dollars that she had, and that somehow I was independently wealthy and would just give up my house to her. I knew I'd eventually blow the lid on this when she started dating some new guy only 5 months after my dad was in the ground. And one time when I came home from college after graduating, she and her new boyfriend, some sleazy looking D-bag named Ivan who was only a few years older than me, were acting like I was a guest in my own house and that they owned it. I played along. Grace told me that she gave away my PS4 to Ivan's cousin because I'm quote, too old to be playing with video games. I don't even know this kid and you gave away my PS4? To somebody I don't even know? I quickly changed all my network passwords the same day. I smiled, but I knew what I had to do eventually. She also said that she and Ivan were getting married because quote, I can't mourn your father forever. I have a life to move on with. I tell her that I graduated college and already secured employment with a local firm and will quote, find a new place to live. She looks thrilled, especially the part where it looks like I'll have to find a new place to live. Then in a patronizing way, she tells me, quote, you'll always have a place in our house though. You're welcome to stay whenever you please. Thanks, Grace. Really generous of you. What I really say is I'll probably find a new place in 3 months. She says this is wonderful because she intends to go to her homeland to have a wedding with Ivan and afterwards have her honeymoon. She assures me it's a local affair, otherwise I'd invite you, honey. And anyway, I know you're busy. I congratulate her. She asked me if I can watch the house for her. Watch my own house? Sure. What I really say is, of course, I'll take care of the house. I'm careful not to say, quote, your house. She and her D-bag fiance, who I'm 100% sure is only there for Grace's money, go on their trip and I immediately put out advertisements and rental websites offering to lease out my house. I hire movers and have all of Grace's furniture and possessions boxed up and put in a storage facility. I retain all of my parents' furniture that they had before my dad met Grace. The locks? Changed. All of them. Within days, I'm undaunted with dozens of inquiries regarding my amazing furnished house with fantastic views. I rented to a wonderful young family. a barrister and a schoolteacher wife, and their 2 preteen children. They pay me their first and last month's rent, and sign a lease for the year. I warn them about my crazy stepmom who thinks this house is hers, and I present them with contact information for my lawyer, the same lawyer that my dad retained, in case they need any assurance that I'm on the level. I also give my lawyer the information about the storage facility, including the fact that I generously paid for 4 months of storage in advance, which is a whole month longer than Grace's Czech honeymoon adventure. I then found a great apartment in the city near my new place of work. There, I met a woman in a restaurant that I frequent at night after a long day of work. We've been dating for 6 months now and we're engaged. Grace, of course, tried to shriek and cause trouble when she realized that she got kicked out of my house. But my lawyer quickly shut her mouth without me ever having to speak to her garbage face again. From what I hear, her and her trash husband left the country, and I assume they're still blowing through my dad's money, and will soon be broke like chavs usually become when they get a taste of a little bit what they think is a good life. So maybe Grace will go and try to exploit some other lonely man in giving her his money. Speaking of money, the house that I rent out is generating so much money that I'm not only able to pay for my cousin's college, but I moved into a larger apartment on my own, together with my fiance. I love my job, but really, I could survive solely on renting my dad's old house. And to think, if Grace had only been cooler and nicer, I might have let her stay at the house, just to be a good sport. And definitely if she stayed out of my room. But no, she had to act like she was the owner, so I had to make her homeless as a wedding gift. Proscript, I bought another PS4. Even though I didn't even use the old one that much, it didn't matter. It wasn't for Grace to give away. You don't give away people's things, you give away your own things. Which is why I chose to kick Grace out of my house, because it's mine, and I decide who stays there. I love this story. OP's stepmom is such a terrible person. I can't believe people do this, just use up somebody's money and then flaunt it in front of their living relatives after they die. She definitely deserved everything that was coming to her, and maybe even more. I don't think she even deserves your dad's money, but I'm glad you're a good sport and just let her have it. Good for you, OP. I'm glad you're living your best life.
Guy quits his job thinking he became rich. Hey, new to Reddit. I thought that I would post my story here. I work for a construction company and we do remodeling on homes. We have a rule here that we get to keep anything that we find hidden in the walls. We hired this guy, we really need a worker badly, who was a total a-hole from day one. I've been working for this company for 5 years, and this guy's only been doing construction for 1 year after he got fired from his accounting job for getting a DUI. Anyways, he would always make fun of my clothes and my accent, and one day he just went too far by telling my boss about my private Instagram account pics. He got on my phone and looked through my Instagram page and showed my boss a picture of me smoking weed. Little did he know that my boss is my friend from 8 years, and we used to smoke together before we both quit. I was so mad that he violated my privacy, then I made a plan to screw him over. He was the kind of guy who would always come in late and complain that trains or traffic is why he's late. One day I overheard him saying that if he won the lottery, he would quit his job for not getting the, quote, respect he deserves. You have to earn your respect here. One day I bought some fake gold coins online and I put them in a metal box that I found at an antique store and waited for a chance to hide it in a wall. Luckily, I did not have to wait long. The day that he found the coins, it seemed like it was his best day ever. First thing he did when he opened the box, he called my boss an effing loser and quit immediately on the spot. He said, "F this place, I'm rich, LOL. Little does he know that that was the best day of my life." After he quit, my boss told us that he was going to fire him anyways for always showing up late. Oh, I wish I could see the look on his face when he finds out the gold coins are fake. Best $40 I spent in my life. I apologize for my grammar, this just happened today and my adrenaline is pumping hard. Thanks for reading. OP, this is hilarious and part of the reason why I love prorevenge so much. This guy's kinda dumb just to quit on the spot like that without even making sure the coins are real. Are antique gold coins even enough to quit your job over? I don't know, but this was pretty hilarious. Thank you, OP.
Guy behind me in traffic was blinding me with his high beams, so I violated his retinas with the full force of the afternoon sun. I was driving home from work and traffic was backed up pretty bad for a few miles. It was stop and go, and when I get stuck like that, I usually back about 75 feet off the car in front of me, and then I can hold that pace and move at a slow but constant roll, like semi-trucks do. This way, I'm not participating in the bumper-to-bumper move and brake like the rest of the smooth brain drivers. Some dude in an Acura crossover was behind me, and I guess he was getting upset because I wasn't 2 feet from the car in front of me, driving like a smooth brain. So he gets all up in my butt and starts beeping his horn at me. LOL, I think to myself as I turn up my radio. But then he starts flashing his brights at me, which is where I get annoyed. He's in one of those Acuras that has the super bright LED headlights. My car is much lower than his, so his low beams are already pretty bright in my mirrors. Bright enough that I don't want to look in them. The first time he flashed his high beams, it put spots in my vision for a moment. It genuinely hurt my eyes. After the first flash, he waits about 10 seconds. beeps his horn, and then flashes me again. Now I'm getting pissed. I'm thinking, where the hell do you want me to go? Do you really think being 2 feet from the car in front of you makes traffic move faster? Then he flashes me a third time, but this time he held them for about 15 seconds. Time for the gloves to come off. During those 15 seconds, as I'm looking away from my mirrors, I see my 14,000 lumen searchlight sitting in my passenger seat, at which point I'm immediately overcome by a wave of chaotic, lawful excitement. What he has just set in motion cannot be stopped. I think to myself, ho, buddy, you just opened the wrong can of worms. You're going to learn today. I grab my flashlight and set it to the absolute max 14,000 lumen brightness setting. The flashlight has a sensor in it to automatically dim the light if facing down on the table, because otherwise the diodes would get so hot that they would melt the lens. The 14,000 lumen setting is so intense that the 57 watt-hour battery can only hold it for 180 seconds before the flashlight automatically notches down to a measly 9,500 lumens. During those 180 seconds, the light will burn through 15% of its battery. For reference on just how bright that is, the literal freaking sun emits a luminosity of 11,000 lumens per square foot on a bright and clear day. I turn around and aim it straight out the back of my rear window. My car is pretty noisy, so before I turn it on, I rev up my engine to make sure Captain Smoothbrain is eyes forward when I violate his retinas with the full force of the afternoon sun. I hit the power button and I can only imagine the freight train of shock and pain that plowed over this man. It was so bright that his automatic headlight shut off, because the car thought it was daytime. With the lights on, I could see him clear as glass through the tinted windshield. He was covering his eyes and looking down, probably screaming. I watched him try and flip his sun visor down, but he couldn't find it, as I thought to myself, burn, mother trucker, burn. I imagine my facial expression was similar to that of a 6-year-old roasting insects with a magnifying glass on a bright summer day. After about 5 seconds of blinding light, I took mercy on him and shut it off. He proceeded to back way the hell off and move to a different lane. Was this the unsafe thing for me to do? Absolutely. Was it illegal? Almost certainly. Was it warranted? Without question. Possibly the highlight of my career. Drive safe, don't be a jerk to the car in front of you, because they might have the tools to teach you a lesson. Do I condone this action? No. Do I find it hilarious? Yes. This is one of the best posts I've ever read. I hate those bright ass LED lights, man. They kill me. Leave me for dead? I'll destroy your fraternity. This is longer than I intended it to be, but F it. After high school ended, I was in a pretty bad place mentally, so I decided to make some extremely unwise decisions during my first year of college. I was basically always on something in order to keep what I later realized was severe depression at bay. For a variety of misplaced reasons, I also decided to join a fraternity. It was a convenient way to keep getting the things that I thought I needed at the time, but mostly I just craved human connection in a way that I thought being a quote brother would bring. Well, I didn't see it for a while, but I was wrong. The fraternity had a house on campus that was allocated to them, but it might as well have been off campus because of how crazy the parties were. Campus police would rarely pass by, let alone come in, no matter how much noise was being made. Still, that made it the perfect place for me. I could let loose and escape the sadness that followed me around during the day without being bothered. And the people there seemed to like me well enough that they at least tolerated my being around so often. At first it was just, quote, official parties on the weekends, and then every weekend, Thursday nights, Wednesday night, until at one point I was spending hours drinking there every night of the week to hide from myself. Before I knew it, my first semester was over, and the shallow friendships that I had made through the bonds of getting ridiculously messed up had started to pay off. Or so I thought. They told me that they were extending an offer to me as a pledge next semester. For those who don't know, pledging is a process that lasts, for this particular chapter of this fraternity, 1 semester. And it's something that you have to go through officially to become a brother, aka a member of the fraternity. I was ecstatic. My second semester rolls around, and I'm given the invitation in traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity fashion. Once again, I was ecstatic. The thought that I was actually wanted and valued by these people, who I had thought I had it all figured out, felt like it'd be the highlight of my year. I never really fit in with most members of the fraternity, probably because other than excessive consumption of drugs and alcohol, we really didn't have that much in common. But I started to look up to these guys. While most of the time they passed me by in a haze of my own creation, the moments that I remembered made it seem like these guys were kind, cool, and genuine people. Although most of my quote friendships during the year were with people from this particular fraternity, I had made some friends in my own dorm hall as well. One night after pre-gaming in somebody else's dorm, I was happy for any excuse to start drinking at 3 p.m. A couple of girls came up to me. They asked why I was pledging with this particular frat, given its reputation, why someone as nice as me would want to be around people like that. I asked what they were talking about. They told me that this particular frat house has a reputation as a place where girls shouldn't get too drunk. Trying not to be as graphic as possible here. I told them that it must be a rumor that started because of guys who had already graduated, because there was no way that any of my brothers I knew would do anything like that. I second guessed my sense of belonging for the first time that night, but I was too starved for human connection to seriously consider that I might not be making the best choices. Still, a small crack had formed in the facade that I had built around these people. Another night, I had overheard a couple of brothers talking when I woke up to use the bathroom, talking about how they desperately needed members to keep the house, and how it was a shame that they had to let me become a brother at the end of the semester, because they normally never let someone like me in. Fine, I thought. That's how these three feel, but most of the others like me, and actually want me here. Wrong. But my life was in pieces before I got to college, and I was so desperate for friends, and a sense of belonging that I was willing to rationalize anything to keep the lie going. One night while doing a traditional, stupid, ritualistic fraternity event, aka consuming copious amounts of alcohol to the point of serious risk, for brothers and pledges only, I did what was expected of me, and well, consumed copious amounts of alcohol, to the point of serious risk. For anonymity's sake, I won't describe the event, but I was in and out blacking out for a while until a certain point when I stopped remembering anything. Over the years though, some things have come back to me and I've tried to process this experience. I've had flashes of being turned over and somehow holding my head up so I could throw up in a trash can and not on myself or the chair I was on. There's a slideshow of me fall walking down half the stairs. One of the last things I remember is asking to stay the night in one of my brother's rooms because I knew, somehow, that I was ridiculously drunk and didn't want to get caught on the way back to mine. He said no. He was my closest friend there. It should have been clear to anyone that I wasn't safe, but these guys were still giving me crappy light beer instead of water because it's basically the same thing. I'll never get that line, or the laughter that followed, out of my head. Instead of getting me help, or even just letting me stay there, one of my brothers took me back to my dorm. Luckily for me, an RA saw me being brought in, essentially over his shoulder, and felt like I was in danger, so she called for help. Even after all these years, the last thing I remember from that night is a knock at my door of my dorm. When I woke up, I was in the hospital the next morning, and I was told I could have died. They described how I acted, and it was clear to me after just hearing about it, I was in danger. My BAC, blood alcohol concentration, was at a 0.37, and somehow still more in my stomach that I hadn't thrown up before they had pumped it. For reference, alcohol poisoning can cause death and generally shows up around 0.3, while 0.4 is potentially fatal on its own because heart or lungs can stop working. My RA almost certainly saved my life. I made an excuse that I just wanted to update them, but I was tired and still recovering, so I could go back to my dorm. I stewed in anger and resentment for hours. I thought about all the things I had experienced, all the warning signs, and I made a plan. First, I set up a new email account and got the facility head of disciplinary committee. Calling him committee head now because the full title is annoying to type out every time. A guy who apparently really hated the presence of fraternity on campus housing. I told him I was a student who had information about crimes committed by the members of this particular fraternity, and I wanted them gone. Not just from their house, but from the school. I also talked to one of the girls who took me aside in my dorm, one I felt I could trust, and asked if she or anybody she knew had experiences, names, anything. She wasn't willing to step forward personally, but she knew someone who was and helped me get in touch. 3 days later, I met with the committee head at 4 a.m. in someone else's office. I didn't want to be seen because I didn't want anybody else to know what was going on or have any heads up. I asked him what he needed to take their house, and he told me. He amended the report that I gave to the original disciplinary officer to include two, quote, accidental mentions of a particularly relatively uncommon alcohol, which is one this fraternity uses for their stupid traditional ritualistic fraternity-only drinking events. For what it's worth, the alcohol was actually present, so it wasn't exactly a lie. Apparently that was enough for an investigation and wouldn't need me to be involved any more than I already was, which was something I insisted on. The investigation merely being open was enough for one anonymous tip to say where certain quantities of drugs were likely to be hidden within the frat house. It was also enough for campus police to come knocking with real police in tow to tear the place apart if enough was found the first time. Remember, the house is owned by the school, so as long as the school gives permission to police to search and they have enough reason to, they're good to go. I also got in contact with a brave girl who was willing to come forward with her story. I don't know if she ever got real justice, but I know that one member of the frat suddenly dropped out between the first time I met with a committee head and when the police came. I hope she did. I made myself scarce around the frat house for a month or so with the excuse that I needed to stop drinking. I didn't stop, at least at that point, but I needed some reason for my distance. Even though I wasn't as around as often as I once was, I did spend some time there to put various amounts of coke, Xanax, MDMA, ketamine, and LSD in places that people wouldn't look until the time was right. I'd never been a rich guy, so it wasn't much, but pretty much every other room had enough for a minor possession charge thanks to my generosity. When the house was eventually got flipped and the drugs were found, I dropped out because despite my best attempts to hide it, at that point most of the brothers were keeping me at arm's length and looking at me with suspicion. It was at the end of my semester anyway, and I'd gone from doing fairly well in my first semester to failing most of my classes around the second. I still got to see some of them dragged out of the house in handcuffs, so it was worth it. When it was all said and done, the frat house was essentially raided twice, and at least 3 of my brothers dropped out while facing serious possession charges that I had nothing to do with. Those were their drugs. And the rest of them had to separate, moving into dorms or already scarce off-campus housing where the fraternity was banned by the school from ever having an official on-campus house for the next decade. Many of them also got minor possession charges on their own, or thanks to me. This was almost a decade ago now, and I don't regret any of it, all apart from the fact that I didn't do something sooner. Eventually I got help for my mental health, and I no longer abused drugs or alcohol to cope with the pain. I also transferred away from that terrible school with just 1 good semester on my transcript, though I never got around to finishing my degree because I spent years in a self-destructive spiral and all my money on therapy to pull myself out. I just hope what I did made it at least slightly less likely for others not to be in danger, one way or another. And that all the people who deserved it got what was coming to them. The pessimist in me doubts it, but I'd like to think that they did. At the very least, I know that the fraternity doesn't have any presence at my former school anymore. Seems like it's kind of hard to get new recruits when you lose the only thing you had going for you, and your already crappy reputation gets worse. I know this post was really long, but it was a roller coaster of emotions. Honestly, I just had to cover it. It was insane how OP almost died and then he kind of low-key came back and got his revenge and then left the college while everything was in shambles. 10 out of 10 posts. Loved it. Ruin my wedding to propose? I'll ruin your proposal. I have a young brother, Todd, who had a complicated birth and had to stay a month in the ICU. And because of that, my parents have always doted on him and denied him nothing, even if it was to the detriment of my sister Abby and I. My brother drinks in on the attention and has more than one occasion made himself the center of attention at either my sister's or my cousin's special event. Because of this, Abby, my sister, and I have always had a strained relationship with Todd and our parents. Unfortunately, Todd met and fell in love with Lucy, who announced her own pregnancy at the baby shower my mom held for Abby, my sister. Jesus. When I proposed to my wife Michelle, I just wanted to elope, but she really wanted her family to be there, so I invited my family out of obligation. While my best man Jim noticed a receipt from a jewelry store slip out of Todd's pocket, Jim confronted Todd about this, which led to an argument. Jim told me about everything, and I told Todd he was no longer going to be my groomsman, because I knew he was going to propose at my wedding. Todd cried to our parents, which led to a blowout. In my parents' eyes, since Todd never admitted that he was going to propose to Lucy at my wedding, I was unfairly judging him. I refused and brought up Todd's past behavior. My parents couldn't refute this and got Todd to agree to not try anything at my wedding. This wasn't enough to convince me to let him be my groomsman, but I warned him if, as a guest, he'd try anything, I'd make him regret it. Fast forward to the wedding, and surprise, surprise, Todd walked over to Lucy, proposed to her during Michelle's father-daughter dance, and did it in a way that everyone would notice. Holy shit, I hate it here. Cue my revenge. Jim and I hired a woman to pretend to be Todd's side piece, who cornered Todd and Lucy and claimed that she was pregnant with his baby. Todd denied this, but when she called his phone, I gave her his number and messed with Todd's phone to incriminate him. It didn't look good. Lucy threw the ring back at Todd and left in tears. When Todd saw the smile on my face, he knew it was me. I didn't respond to a single call/text from him or my parents until the honeymoon. Lucy has thrown Todd's stuff out and has been denying access to their kid. Todd is furious and is demanding that I clear his name. I sent him a text saying I have no idea what he was talking about, as well as a screenshot for the bill of the wedding, and gave him a vague message demanding reimbursement for half the wedding cost. Michelle knew the whole time what I was planning and gave me the green light after Todd ruined her moment with her dad, so I felt pretty good, but now even Abby thinks I went too far. This is absolutely golden. That guy deserves every bit of this. If you want to be the center of attention, oh boy, you'll be the center of attention after this. 10 out of 10. Stranger tells me, smile, it could be worse. Instantly regrets it. Last week, I was out and about, starting on some errands I had. As I was walking, I was going through this long to-do list in my head. I wasn't frowning, I wasn't smiling, my face was just neutral. A man starts heading towards me. As we pass, he tells me, "Smile, it could be worse." I stop, stare at him for a moment, and then I say, "My parents were in an accident. My mom died on impact. We're turning off my dad's life support tomorrow." The guy looked like a robot being suddenly shut down. His face fell. He looked like a deer in headlights. He stuttered and stammered. He was obviously trying to think of something to say, and when he couldn't, he turned around and sped walked away. My parents are both fine. There's no accident, but it annoys me when people think they have the right to dictate how people are feeling, what expressions they make, especially when they don't know what's going on in their lives. It's unhelpful and patronizing. Imagine telling somebody who was just given a terminal diagnosis, "Smile, it could be worse," or somebody who has a lost child, been laid off, or is otherwise struggling and in a terrible situation. Like, I definitely get why you put this on r/petty revenge, because that's super petty, but I really get why you did it. It's super condescending of somebody to just tell you to smile. Like, you don't know what somebody's going through. Don't force somebody to have emotions. Just move on with your life, man.
My half-sister wanted to show up in a wedding dress to my engagement party, so I changed the party theme so that she would fit right in. My half-sister, Heather, and I never really got along. We're both 24. My father left my mother for her mother, and we were both born in the same month, 20 days apart. It's always been weird. It doesn't help that Heather's mom hates me and my mom. By extension, Heather and I didn't have the best relationship. She was always trying to one-up me, even though we both have a similar economic background. I can give examples of this, but for the sake of the word limit, I won't write them here. So my fiance and I got engaged last month, and we had our engagement party this Saturday. We had planned it for originally to be a casual, formal event. Nice dresses, but not "I'm going to the Met Gala" kind of nice. More like we're going to a nice restaurant. Anyway, my cousin hits me up saying she has something to show me. It was a picture of this dress that Heather was gonna wear. Okay, yeah, that definitely looks like a wedding dress. This dress. Jesus Christ. It can only be described as opulent. It was long and white, strapless with sewn-in crystals, and golden accents. I'm pretty sure it's a wedding dress, but I can't be 100%. It made me mad. So I decided that. I started texting people, telling them that there had been a change of plans, and that instead of a casual formal, I decided to make it a costume party. My mother's side is crazy for Halloween, so they were immediately on board. I told my father via text and asked him to relay the message to Heather and her mother, knowing full well that he would forget to leave it to the last minute. Saturday comes along. Guests start showing up, most of them in costumes. Some didn't have time to get one, so we just provided them with hats and cheap wigs. Heather and my dad and her mother come like 1 hour late. As soon as she noticed that everyone was either wearing elaborate costumes or weird accessories and didn't stand out, she lost it. Especially when my fiance came along and told her, "Wow, that bride dress looks amazing for a cheap costume." She left crying, and her mother and father told me that I was being childish, and I should have told Heather myself and not have tasked my father. For those interested, my fiance was dressed as Bubbles and I was dressed as Mojo Jojo. My mom and aunts went as ABBA. Other memorable costumes were Luffy and Zoro, Ian Malcolm, John Hammond, and Jesus. This post was originally on Am I the Butthole? And honestly, I don't think so. I think this was the perfect form of revenge.
So, you want to snoop through your daughter's text? So I'm married to a wonderful woman. She's smart, funny, and very kind. Her mother is generally very nice and tends to have a great attitude and be very enjoyable. A bit of a prude, but generally enjoyable. However, can be a bit of a major snoop. If my wife leaves her phone sitting around, she'll just pick it up and start going through it. My wife has kind of laughed this off as a remnant of her mom being controlling when she was a kid. I'm not a fan of this because my wife and I sometimes text about things that simply don't involve her mother, and I don't feel that are her business at all. So, over Christmas, I saw my wife set her phone down on the kitchen counter, and I had a brilliant idea. Her mom was still in the kitchen, and I sent my wife the most depraved text about all the things I was gonna do to her when everyone left. Honestly, most of them aren't even things we've done, but I wanted to make it extra scarring. I sent this from the bathroom, and maybe it was my imagination, but I swear I could hear an audible gasp after the phone went off. When I went out, her mother absolutely would not look me in the eye, then not so discreetly asked her daughter to come out and talk to her in the other room. When my wife came back in the living room, I thought she'd been crying. However, upon closer inspection, she was laughing. Her mother had questioned her about me, I can't even say this on YouTube, S.A.ing her, and if I always talk down to her like that. My wife told her kindly that what we do is between us and us only. Probably the best gift this Christmas. If you ask me, this was 100% well deserved. If you don't want to see that, don't look through somebody's phone. You know what I mean?
My boyfriend looked up spoilers to our favorite video game, so I did too. My boyfriend and I play Zelda Breath of the Wild together. I'm a take your time and enjoy the ride kind of gal, and he's more of a let's look up how to beat the game right now kind of guy. Because this way ruins all the fun, we came up with the rule: no looking up spoilers. We were looking for a particular challenge, the 8 heroine side quest for my fellow Zelda nerds, for a very long time. Suddenly, my boyfriend said, I did something bad. I looked up where to go. I'm so sorry, I just couldn't take it anymore. I told him it was fine, but he couldn't tell me what he had seen. We agreed. I then excused myself to the bathroom and looked up the location as well. I then spent the next hour and a half wandering so close to the location without ever making it there. I could see him squirming around in his seat every time I got close. When I jumped off the cliff that the statue was built onto, gliding down to the base of the statue and continuing on without turning around to look at it, I thought he was going to explode. He was clenching his hair in both fists and biting his lower lip trying to contain himself. That's when I caved and told him what I had done. He thought it was hilarious and told me about how he wanted more than anything to yell, "Turn around, what are you doing?" We had a good laugh about it, and he hasn't looked up a spoiler since. Was it a little petty? Maybe, but it was still super cute and wholesome. I'm glad that OP and her boyfriend could have a fun time and just laugh about this. Don't use me to parent your kids. I have dwarfism, and this often leads to weird interactions in public, especially with kids. Sometimes a kid will come up to me and ask me why I'm so short, and I have a pre-prepared response for that, but most of the time they just loudly ask their parents why I'm so short. Usually the parents will awkwardly drag their kids away, telling them not to comment on people in public. This is sad, but it's understandable. I like the parents who just say something about how some people are just born like that. And even though we look a bit different, we're still regular people just like everyone else. Sometimes I hear a gem like, I bet he shrank in the wash. What I can't stand is when people try to use me to parent their kids. I'm sure you can think of ways to convince your kids to finish their plate at dinner that don't involve pointing at a dwarf in public and saying, that's what happens when you leave your food on your plate, or he didn't listen to mommy when she told him to eat all his vegetables. It's rude, it's humiliating, and it teaches your kid that differences are bad, and that people are at fault for their differences or disabilities. It just pisses me off. A few days ago, I was in public and a kid who was maybe 4 or 5 years old was acting out, and his mom was clearly struggling to keep him under control. So she pointed to me and told her son that I was one of Santa's elves, and that I was watching him and could tell Santa about his behavior. The kid's name was on a keyring on his backpack, so I just said, it's okay, Hunter. You're already on the nice list, and Santa told me that you're getting an iPad this Christmas. Hunter was super excited. His mom was not. This is honestly the best way to go about this situation, because now that kid is going to be pestering his mom the rest of the year for an iPad, and he's going to be very disappointed when he doesn't get one under the tree. So she better get him an iPad.
If you've gotten this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. If you really enjoy our content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.